My name is Rachel Carter. I was 32 years old, worked as an elementary school counselor, and for the first time in my life, I had started planning a future around two tiny heartbeats. We were expecting twins. My husband Daniel had already started calling them our little miracles. We had two names picked out, although we had agreed not to tell anyone until we were certain. Then, one Thursday evening, everything changed. I was sitting on the couch when a sudden wave of pain left me unable to stand. Daniel called an ambulance. Within minutes, we were rushing toward the hospital. I remember staring at the ceiling of the ambulance and thinking about the two babies I had spent months imagining. I kept asking the paramedic whether they would be okay. She held my hand and told me the doctors would do everything they could. But somewhere inside, I already knew something was terribly wrong. At the hospital, the doctor spoke quietly with Daniel. Then one of them came to my bedside. She explained that the pregnancy could not continue and that I needed urgent medical treatment. I stared at her without understanding the words. All I could think was, both of them? The doctor gently nodded. I closed my eyes. Daniel stood beside me, holding my hand so tightly that I could feel his fingers shaking. Then he reached for his phone. "We should call your family." I nodded. He called my mother first. I heard only his side of the conversation. "She knows what is happening, right?" A pause. "But Rachel needs us here." Another pause. Daniel's expression changed. When he ended the call, he would not look at me. My mother was not coming. Then he called my father, then my sister. One by one, the answers were different. One had work. One said they did not know what to say. Another said Daniel was there, so I was not really alone. I finally turned my face toward the wall. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Daniel was there, so apparently I did not need anyone else. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever needed your family during the worst moment of your life, only to discover they were not there? If emotional family stories and realistic stories of betrayal and justice are your kind of content, subscribe to Public Evidence. We are building a community around original stories like this one. And tell me in the comments what country you are watching from. A nurse came in and told Daniel they were preparing me for the procedure. He kissed my forehead. Then he whispered, "I am not leaving you." For the first time that night, I believed someone. Then the hospital doors opened. A woman walked quickly toward us. It was Daniel's mother, Margaret. She looked at me, then at Daniel, and immediately asked, "Why did nobody tell me how serious this was?" Margaret walked toward us carrying nothing. No flowers, no overnight bag, no carefully chosen words. She simply walked straight to my bed, took my hand, and sat beside me. Then she looked at Daniel. "What happened?" Daniel swallowed hard. "We lost the twins." Margaret's face changed instantly. She closed her eyes for a moment, then leaned forward and kissed my forehead. "I am so sorry, Rachel." That was all she said. She did not tell me everything would be okay. She did not tell me I could have more children. She did not tell me that things happened for a reason. She just stayed. A nurse came in to explain that they were preparing me for the procedure. Margaret stood immediately. "Can I stay with her until you take her?" The nurse nodded. Daniel stepped outside to make a few calls. I stared at the ceiling. I was afraid to close my eyes. Because every time I did, I imagined the two babies we had already started loving. Margaret noticed. She pulled her chair closer. "You do not have to be strong for anyone tonight." Those words broke something inside me. I started crying. Not quietly, not politely. I cried the way I had wanted to cry since the ambulance arrived. Margaret held my hand while I told her everything I had been too afraid to say. I had already imagined their first Christmas. I had already wondered which one would look like Daniel. I had even started saving pictures of twin nurseries. Margaret listened without interrupting. Then she told me something I had never heard before. 27 years ago, I lost a baby too. I looked at her. She continued quietly. Everyone kept telling me to move on. Your husband was working. My parents said I was young. People kept explaining why I would be fine. But I did not need explanations. I needed someone to sit beside me. She squeezed my hand. So tonight, I am sitting beside you. A few minutes later, Daniel returned. His eyes were red. He had been trying to reach my family again. Nobody was coming. Then my phone vibrated. It was a message from my mother. I opened it expecting an apology. Instead, it said, "We thought Marga was taking care of everything. Daniel is there too. Try to rest." I stared at the screen. Margaret saw my expression. What did they say? I slowly turned the phone toward her. She read the message. Her face became completely still. Then she looked at Daniel and quietly asked, "They knew she was this serious, and they still decided not to come?" Margaret did not say anything for several seconds. She simply stared at my mother's message. Then she looked at me. "Rachel, did your mother know you were being taken into surgery?" I nodded. Daniel answered for me. "The doctors told us she needed urgent treatment." Margaret slowly placed the phone on the chair. Then she asked something that I had been too afraid to ask myself. Why would they think someone else could take their place? I did not have an answer. Because the truth was, my family had always treated me like the daughter who could handle everything. When my sister had a breakup, I was expected to drive 3 hours to help her. When my father needed surgery, I was the one who organized his appointments. When my mother was overwhelmed, I was the daughter she called. But that night, when I needed them, they had decided I was strong enough to be left alone. A nurse came in and told us it was time. Margaret stood immediately. She held my hand as they began wheeling my bed toward the operating area. Daniel walked beside us. I looked at both of them and realized something strange. The people I expected to be there had disappeared. The person I never expected to need had become the one refusing to leave. Before the doors closed, Margaret leaned toward me. "You are not going through this alone." Then the doors shut. When I woke up, it was several hours later. Daniel was sitting beside my bed. Margaret was asleep in the chair across the room. For the first time that day, I felt safe enough to cry. Daniel reached for my hand. "I am so sorry." I shook my head. It was not his fault. But then he said something that made me look at him. "I found out why your family did not come." I waited. He pulled out his phone. There was a family group chat, messages from earlier that evening. My mother had written, "Rachel has Daniel and the hospital staff. She does not need everyone there." My sister replied, "I agree. Margaret is probably going anyway." Then my father wrote, "Let us give them space." I stared at the screen. They had not misunderstood the situation. They had discussed it. They had made a decision. And they had decided that someone else could carry the weight of my worst night. I slowly handed the phone back to Daniel. Margaret had awakened. She looked at my face and immediately understood. Then she said something I will never forget. "Rachel, you need to stop measuring your worth by who shows up when you are hurting." I looked at her. She continued quietly, "Because sometimes the people you would do anything for are not the people who deserve access to your heart." For the first time, I realized this was no longer just about one terrible night. It was about a lifetime of being the daughter everyone trusted to survive. And I knew that when I finally went home, I was going to have a conversation with my family that none of us would ever forget. I went home 4 days later. The house looked exactly the same. The same photographs on the walls, the same coffee mug beside the sink, the same blanket folded across the couch. But I felt like I had returned to a place I no longer recognized. Daniel wanted to come with me when I visited my parents. Margaret offered to come too. I thanked them both. Then I said something I had never said before. I need to do this myself. My mother opened the door. She looked relieved to see me standing there. Rachel! She reached toward me. I stepped back. Not because I hated her, because I was still trying to understand how the woman who raised me could decide I was strong enough to face that night without her. We sat in the living room. My father joined us a few minutes later. Nobody knew how to begin. Finally, my mother whispered, "We thought you were safe." I looked at her. "I was never asking you to keep me safe. I was asking you to come." Her eyes filled with tears. "Your sister was having a difficult night too." I took a slow breath. What happened with my sister? My father looked down. She had argued with her boyfriend. That was it. I stared at both of them. I was being prepared for emergency surgery. "And you stayed home because my sister had an argument?" My mother immediately shook her head. "That is not fair. We thought Margaret was with you." I reached into my bag and placed the printed family messages on the coffee table. "You did not think. You discussed it. You decided I would be fine." Nobody spoke. I pointed toward the message my mother had written. "She has Daniel and the hospital staff." Then I looked at her. Mom. I was not asking for a doctor. I was not asking for someone to fix what happened. I wanted my mother. My father covered his face with both hands. For several seconds, he did not speak. Then he finally said, "I think we have spent so many years believing you could handle anything, that we forgot handling something and being alone are not the same thing." My mother began crying. I expected myself to feel angry. Instead, I felt exhausted. I had spent years being the dependable daughter, the responsible daughter, the strong daughter. And somewhere along the way, everyone had mistaken strength for invulnerability. Then my mother said something unexpected. "I want to apologize, but I know an apology will not change that night." I looked at her. For the first time, she was not defending herself. She was admitting what she had done. I stood up. "I forgive you for being human, but I cannot pretend this did not change me." I walked toward the door. Then my father called my name. "Rachel, there is something you need to know about your mother." He looked at the floor. "She has been carrying something from that night that she has never told you." I stopped and turned around. I turned around. My father looked at my mother. She nodded slowly. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Mine. No. It was my mother's handwriting. She held it toward me but did not let go. "I wrote this the night you were in surgery." I opened it carefully. The first sentence made my chest tighten. "Rachel, I do not know how to tell you that I almost lost my daughter without ever being beside her." I kept reading. She admitted that when Daniel called, she had been afraid. Not afraid of the surgery itself, afraid of facing what might happen. She had spent years convincing herself that I was strong enough to survive anything. That night, instead of confronting her fear, she hid behind it. Then came the sentence that hurt the most. "When I told myself Margaret was there, I was not really thinking about you. I was thinking about how I could avoid seeing my daughter suffer." I lowered the paper. For the first time, I understood that my mother had not stayed away because she did not care. She stayed away because she could not handle the pain. That did not excuse what she had done, but it explained it. She looked at me through tears. "I was wrong, Rachel. You were never the strong daughter who needed me less. You were my daughter who needed me, and I was not there. I could have walked away." Instead, I sat back down. We talked for almost 2 hours. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no instant healing, just honesty. My mother apologized. My father admitted that he had followed her decision instead of questioning it, and I finally told them something I had spent years refusing to say. "I do not want to be the strong one anymore." My mother reached across the table. "Then do not be." I let her hold my hand. Months passed. the grief did not disappear. Some days were still difficult, but my family began learning how to show up differently. They stopped assuming I was fine. They started asking. And when I said I was not okay, they stayed. Margaret remained part of our lives too. One afternoon, I found her sitting beside me on the porch. She looked at me and smiled. You know, family is not always the people who get it right the first time. Sometimes it is the people who finally learn how to do better. I thought about everything that had happened. Losing the twins had changed me, but so had that night. I had learned that being strong does not mean suffering silently, and needing someone does not make you weak. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is finally admit, I need you to stay. If this story touched you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever been the strong one in your family when all you really wanted was someone to stay? And tell me what country you are watching from. If you want more original family stories about betrayal, resilience, and emotional justice, subscribe to Public Evidence. We are building this community one story at a time, and I would love to have you here.